Most businesses only focus on growing and expanding, and they give little to no attention to their exit strategies until after exit is staring them in the face. Learn here at Boosting Business Value, brought to you by Blue Sky Business Resources. You'll discover how to shape a more durable and saleable business, and how to implement a powerful, well-planned, and rewarding exit. Join Dr. David Gruder and Jason Tuzinkewich as they deliver actionable tips for lower middle market company owners, executives, and their trusted advisors. Find out where your business currently stands, how you can meet your revenue objectives more reliably, and how to grow your venture to the next level, all with a smooth and fruitful exit in mind. Here are your hosts, Dr. David and Jason.
This is a two-part episode on becoming Upheavals Resilient. In this part one, we will unpack key types of upheavals that are important to prevent and monitor. In part two, we'll discuss ways to make your company more upheavals resilient. So for those of you who are new to our show, I'm David Gruder, the business lifecycle, exit planning, and post-acquisition psychologist for Blue Sky Business Resources. And with me is the ever-wonderful co-host of mine, Jason Tuzinkewich, Blue Sky's Chief Operations Officer, and many other hats, actually, too.
You're too kind, Doctor.
So we're going to start with challenges that you're probably facing on the issue of upheavals and managing upheavals. So
yeah,
let's
and
get rolling.
that's a great place for me to jump in, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah.
We really break these challenges down into two different types and then two subsets of those different types. So we've got internal challenges and threats, and then we've got the external challenges and threats. And that all depends on whether those threats are impacting you from within the organization or from without. And then there's the matter of determining whether those threats, once we know whether they're coming from inside or outside, are threats that are foreseeable or whether they're unforeseeable. And unforeseeable doesn't mean that we can't identify that they're going to happen. It's just that we don't have very much transparency into when and how we may be impacted by those. And, when you're talking about, especially today's volatile world, so much chaos going on in sociology, in politics, in the economies, we've got big disasters and big opportunities always seem to be right around the corner. It seems like, disasters are in many ways in business, not in personal. I'm not going to go beyond myself here, but in a lot of ways, disasters are catastrophic for the ill-prepared. And for those who have mechanisms and contingency plans and awareness, disasters can actually be turned around to be great opportunities. And that's what we're looking to, to work with you on in these next two episodes.
Indeed. And where we're going to start with that is just with a quick overview of four areas that we see many companies collapsing under the weight of. And the first of those is inflexibility, which is, in a sense, the opposite of being nimble. Inflexibility prevents nimble navigation of chaos and forced change that is not one that a business might sign up for, but one that a business needs to adapt to because of external factors. Second issue that companies are often collapsing under the weight of is upheaval skilled leadership deficits, where the leadership in a company is not really versed in upheavals resilience skills. And that, again, is the opposite of being nimble. And of course, when we're faced with an upheaval and we don't have upheavals resilience and upheavals management skills, that worsens the impact of the upheaval that we might not have caused in the first place. But in terms of our response to the upheaval, that's not going to be good news. The third is confusion about how to innovate in a rapidly changing economic, political, and cultural environment, which is exactly what we're in the midst of as we record this episode, and I believe for a good long time to come following the recording of this episode. And this results in companies wasting and executives wasting huge amounts of time, energy, mental capacity, and other resources because they're not sure how to remain innovative and nimble in the face of the rapidly changing environment. And the fourth is uncertainty about how to train executives and their teams to surf the changes, to surf the upheavals, instead of being drowned by uncontrollable circumstances.
I love how you set the table, Doctor. That's perfect. And for those of you who haven't met him yet, he's an avid body surfer, so he knows what he's talking about when it's getting above or below the waves.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. So with that background, let's start talking about some of the internal threats and risks that could cause these upheavals. And then we'll talk about the ones that are foreseeable and unforeseeable. And one of the first ones that comes to my mind that makes me crazy, but we see it a lot, is the sacred cows within a culture, or the elements of a business operation that you just can't talk about. And I always say, the best way to avert and resolve internal strife is to turn the lights on. Make it so that there are no dark corners. Make it so that there are no closets for skeletons to hide in, and you're going to have a lot less internal volatility.
That's so true. And what we're talking about in some circles is referred to as don't talk rules. And there's one type of don't talk rule that I particularly want to emphasize here. And that is something that in organizational development and systems psychology is called open secrets. And an open secret is where everyone knows that there's an issue and they're talking about it behind everyone else's backs, but they're not bringing the issue, as you say, fully out into the light, fully out into the open. So that's the first of the internal foreseeable and unforeseeable upheavals. And the second is something that in psychology is referred to as learned helplessness. And essentially, what learned helplessness is where people have been trained into believing they have less power than they actually have, or less impact than they actually have. And when you have a culture of people who think they don't have impact, or who underestimate their positive and or potential negative impact, the culture deteriorates really rapidly, and it's an outgrowth of this phenomenon called learned helplessness.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the biggest internal factors that we're going to talk about today. It's just mind-boggling to me to see how different people manifest this learned helplessness that you're talking about, and no matter how they enact this idea of having no impact or no power, it is cancerous. It spreads like wildfire. It causes so many different outcropping, symptoms that tear an organization and a culture down. And so, I love that you bring that one up, and I think it's so critical. And then the next one is missing accountability procedures. And I always have to laugh about this because I'm a big process and accountabilities guy. And some people love it and other people think I'm a micromanager. I try to stay on the right side of that line, but it's, that's sometimes just a perceptional issue. But where I really find humor in this is that a while back in one of the organizations I was working with, I had a colleague actually pull me into the office and sit me down. He was very aggravated, and he's like, "We need to extricate this word accountability from our cultural language because it's a toxic word." And we had a very long, productive conversation. It's not the word or even the action of accountability that is toxic. It's the perception and how accountability is enforced. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more as we go on, but healthy accountability has a few things. It has an understanding of a single person with whom the buck stops for any given project, task, or initiative. And then it has the understanding underlying of the overall impact that being accountable places on the entire team and the organization as a whole. And I know that, Doctor, you've got more to say about this in the future, but I just here I wanted to introduce that the perception of accountability has become toxic. It's not the action. And if we hold people and ourselves accountable in a healthy and productive fashion, it's the most powerful thing you can do. And if we don't do that, everything else falls apart.
Well said, and that's perfect seed planting for what we'll do a deeper dive into later. Yes. The next internal upheaval source is working capital issues, where there are insufficient or inadequate cash management practices, where, oh my gosh, how often have we seen things like principals in a company or investors in a company receiving premature cash disbursements, despite the fact that the company has inconsistent revenue cycles, and then the money that the company needs in order to manage those inconsistent revenue cycles has disappeared because of those premature cash disbursements. Oh my gosh.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? And it's funny, as we're talking through this, Doctor, it occurs to me that every single working capital issue, whether it's like you said, certain partners extracting cash out of the business that the business can't support, or inventory controls, or even bad management of payables and receivables, it kind of all feeds back into those first two things we talked about, right? The learned helplessness of members on the team who are in a position to say, we could do better, that don't believe that they have the voice to make that impact, and the don't talk rules of saying to a principal, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing taking all that cash out of the business? We've got a year to operate still. And so I think that we're seeing a snowball being built here, and that's exciting. And then the other internal element that I see a lot of disruption coming from is the front line or the operational disruptions. And with businesses that are product manufacturers that have a lot of capital invested into facilities and equipment, it seems more obvious than it actually is when you're in operations, that if you don't maintain that equipment, you're going to have breakage, you're going to have downs, and sometimes people get hurt in that breakage and in those downs. But you'd be shocked how many business owners just don't pay attention to routine management schedules and don't pay attention to their balance sheet. As the whole point of seeing fixed asset value and depreciation in the same block on a balance sheet is so that you can map out when your equipment is expiring. Depreciation isn't just a tax mechanism, it's a mechanism for planning capital expenditures if used properly. And so, seeing that, but also in the service industries, in the service industries, you're delivering a product too, right? Your product is your people. And if your people aren't properly maintained, if your people aren't regularly taken care of, they're going to break down too. And the breakdowns in service industries where the people fall apart can be just as catastrophic for an organization as the breakdowns in equipment in product manufacturers.
So well said, and unfortunately so true. And then the final area of internal upheavals that sometimes is foreseeable or partly foreseeable and sometimes is out of left field is employee lawsuits, especially given how litigious our culture has been for a very, very long time. You'll get employees with entitlement disorder, and when things don't go the way they think they should go, they'll bring a lawsuit. Whether the lawsuit succeeds or not is a whole other story. But even if a lawsuit doesn't succeed, the amount of time, energy, effort, and money that's invested in dealing with the lawsuit is not a pleasant thing. It's not a good thing for a company culture. And some lawsuits are preventable when you have what we'll cover later, as you said earlier, Jason, when you have a truly effective set of accountability procedures, you actually minimize the chances that an employee lawsuit will occur, even though it's impossible to completely eliminate that possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Policies and procedures are the most effective step one. Clear and open communication is the most effective step two. If you have a team that can communicate effectively, you will get advance notice, whether it's from the person that's thinking about raising an action or members of the team that know that person. You'll get some transparency. So, all of these things play into each other in such a profound way. And, I always say, even the lawsuits that fail succeed in breeding chaos. And, the company is always, always, always going to be the loser in that type of chaos. So with all of that said, those are, obviously not an exhaustive list of the internal foreseeable and unforeseeable threats, but I think this is a really good comprehensive foundational baseline for that. And so let's move on, Doctor, to some of the externals, and we're going to keep this list brief as well. But it's one of those. It's a light list, but it's pretty dense in the implications. So if you want to kick us off on that.
Oh, sure. And yeah, we'll cover this as briefly as we can, but the first area of external foreseeable and unforeseeable surprises or upheavals that we want to make sure you're aware of is something that a colleague of mine by the name of David Corbin calls brand slaughter. He actually has a Wall Street Journal best-selling book by that title. And brand slaughter is what happens when the way a company is walking its talk doesn't match its talk. So when words and actions don't match up, that's a real problem. But when a company doesn't sufficiently attend to and monitor and upgrade in response to customer experience concerns, issues, log jams, complications, what happens is that they spread word through word of mouth, through social networks, et cetera, about how allegedly or maybe even actually bad the company is in a particular way. And those external voices that are slaughtering a company's brand because of insufficient attention to or repair of customer experience can create all kinds of external problems to a company's profitability, reputation, integrity, etc.
Yeah, it's so true. And that information spreads so much faster these days with all of the digital connectivity that, you just can't take chances. And, I'm excited to see a lot of businesses actually building a customer experience position in their organizations. Now, the question is, how do they use that customer experience professional, right? So, it's nice to see organizations paying more attention to this brand integrity. But I think that by and large, there's a lot of room in that space as well. And then, the next thing that I like to call kind of the business bubble is best defined by Michael Porter's 5 forces. And that is, all of the direct stakeholders that aren't within the organization, but can dramatically impact how the organization survives and thrives. And so that's the negotiating power of the customer, the negotiating power of the suppliers. And, we talk a lot throughout our podcast and in our business about concentration. And I think that we're the only middle market or lower middle market organization that adds both customer and vendor concentration into our risk analysis. But that's really important. And especially right now that we're seeing all this disruption in supply chain and all these shortages and logistic issues and all of that coming to bear, recognizing the power that your supplier has and having contingency plans for shortfalls in that supplier side is something that I think is going to take a lot more prominence in the not too distant future business discourse, but has been largely neglected in the recent past. Then you've got your competitive environment and understanding where you fit in that competitive environment. There are three legs to the stool, but you can only manage two, right? There's do you compete on quality? Do you compete on service, or do you compete on cost? There's no such thing as competing on all three. And so you have to understand what the competitive environment is and where you fit in it, and then maximizing that. Competitive disruption, that's the new technologies. Those are the things that could come in and completely change the entire game, not just modifying the field, but changing the game that you operate in. And how well versed and how aware are you in your organization? Are you talking regularly about what's on the horizon with regard to potential disruptive technologies in your industry? And then the last one is substitution. And this one kind of fits into that competitive environment and competitive disruption. How easy is it for a customer to go from your product to another product, maybe come back, maybe not? And the easier it is for them to do that, if you've got a Coke versus a Pepsi type of product, then you really need to figure out what your differentiators are that are going to make you stick. And there are a lot of different ways, subscription basis, benefits for duration or durability of a client relationship. All those things can make it harder for a client to leave if there's a minor change in the price or quality or value structure.
Yes, well said. And the only add-on I would offer about that kind of ties substitution and competitive disruption together, which is where a competitor introduces a new disruptive product in your marketplace that you didn't know to anticipate, or kind of knew it was on the horizon, but didn't take proactive steps to mitigate the impact of. And that's what part of what leads to customers replacing you with a competitor.
Mm-hmm. And there are so many stories of giants being blindsided by their own comfort and unwillingness to pay attention. Kodak's the biggest one, but even Microsoft, when the iPad came out, it's all over the place. So you're never too big to be disrupted, but you're also never too small to have to pay attention to these things.
That's true. Another classic example would have been Avis,
Uh-huh.
where Hertz Rent-A-Car was far and away the number one car rental company. And Avis was kind of a distant second. And they decided to give Hertz a run for their money, not by trying to make themselves number one, Avis, but instead by capitalizing on what distinguished Avis from Hertz. And that's where they came up with this immortal and incredibly effective ad campaign. We're number two, we try harder. So people who cared about a company that tried harder, that provided better customer service, went with Avis rather than Hertz. Even though Hertz remained number one, Avis got to gobble up a much larger share of second place than they otherwise were able to command.
Absolutely. Well, great example, Doctor. That's a good one.
Oh, well, your examples are really good too. And so then the last area of external upheavals that we want to touch on are the most obvious area of external upheavals, which have to do with changes in government, government leadership, in government policy, changes in the international climate, changes in economic policy, whether domestically or abroad, or a combination of the two. And sometimes there's handwriting on the wall where some of those changes can be anticipated. Other times there's some blindsiding that happens. And so companies need to have an awareness of what's going on outside the company, not just what's going on inside the company. And we'll get into that more later too.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got to say, Doctor, I'm kind of shocked that you even brought that one up because have either of us in our lifetimes seen any government or international change? I
No,
mean,
you're right. You should be
yeah,
shocked. I mean, we've never seen it.
yeah.
We're just talking hypothetically, aren't we?
Exactly. Oh my goodness. In times such as these, huh?
Oh, how
So
many have we seen? Good Lord.
I don't
Yeah.
have that many fingers, Doctor.
No, I don't either.
So we've talked about all of these elements. We pointed out what they are and how kind of hinted at how we can address these and look at them. Let's get deeper, Doctor. Let's talk about a success roadmap and how do we actually start to look for solutions and bolster ourselves as an organization against these threats. And I'm going to
Good
take the
idea.
internal. Oh, thank you. I'm going to take the internal upheavals and I'm going to say as concisely as possible, the biggest ways that you can bolster your organization from internal consequences are firstly clearly defined what your business really needs in order to be actualized. Now that's saying a lot, right? But what we're talking about is when a founder created a business, they had a vision. That vision was exciting enough that other people came on board to help fulfill that vision. A business's vision is never fully realized, just like a person's individual identity is never going to be fully realized. And so it's always a work in progress. But understand, what does the business from its inception, what does it want to be? How does it operate? How do the people within the organization work together? How do the people within the organization work with the outside world? And how do the tools and equipment that become the infrastructure of that business support the needs of the individuals that are stakeholders, both internally and externally? Then what kind of money is required to really make that happen? And how does the business set itself up through investors, through leverage, and through cash flow to achieve the capital necessities in the stages as it grows? And then getting back to the most important thing, are you living your culture? And do you have the right fits as far as people? I think we've all been in organizations where there have been some really great people that were absolutely in the wrong seat. And so how do you create a mechanism where you define what being in the right seat looks like, from a ability to live the cultural norms of that role or within that role, as well as the understanding, the capacity, and the desire to fulfill the requirements of that role in the best possible way. And then once you have all of that clearly defined and articulated, then how do you monitor the delivery? How do you monitor performance of the organization all the way down to each individual? And that's the biggest way. If you can create that process and that system and that clear understanding of every stage of what your operation needs to look like to be the best it can be, then you can encapsulate that into a process for ensuring that you're consistently delivering and for addressing these disruptions as they spring up, because they always will.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they shall. And so that's kind of our success roadmap a high level overview way for dealing with internal upheavals. And in terms of dealing with external upheavals, Jason and I both believe strongly that it's crucial that at least one leader or executive or partner in the company needs to be working on the business rather than in the business, so that they are the one or ones who are lifting up their heads very regularly and looking around at the external environmental factors, so that the company has the lowest chances of being blindsided by external factors that are possible. So that's the external upheavals roadmap. Essentially, you've got to have at least one person in the company that's really got their eye on the external ball, not the internal ball. And then, so we'll move into the takeaways from this part one. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, please do.
All right. So we've got 3 takeaways for you from part one. And that is, first of all, clearly define what your business needs in order to be actualized. Once you're clear about what your business is going to look like when it's all grown up, then it's a matter of reverse engineering to the present, backwards to the present, to build a bridge that's properly sequenced that gets the business from wherever it is today to full actualization further down the road. So clearly define what your business needs in order to become actualized. The second takeaway is identify, as we said a moment ago, who in your company is going to be the one or ones who lift their heads up and look around at external factors and bring that information back into the company for the company's consideration and strategic decision making about how to address those. And then the final takeaway is a simple one, which is tune into part 2, where we're going to discuss how to become upheavals resilient.
Yeah, I couldn't say it any better, Doctor. That was great. And on behalf of Dr. Gruder and myself, I'd like to thank y'all for tuning into the episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And we look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions. I say this at the end of every episode, either I do or Dr. G does, but we really do appreciate the comments and the feedback. You as the audience can help define where this podcast goes in the future, what you want to hear about, and we'll do our best to give you thoughtful dialogue and discourse, not just in the responding, but also in the creation of new episodes. So please feel free to click the subscribe button so that you can be notified immediately when we release new episodes. And we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you so much and have a great day.
That's all for this episode of Boosting Business Value. May your new learning result in the smoothest and most profitable exit strategy for your business. With the right knowledge and guidance, the sky's the limit to what you can do. Do not miss an episode by subscribing to the show. And if you want to learn where your business currently stands, we also have free key opportunity assessments. Find all of them at blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. Thank you for joining us. See you on the next one.